all here with us for what's the fourth webinar in a webinar series on data management and digitization. That's a topic that's really close to my heart. So I'm really excited, and we have an incredible set of panelists who will be joining us today. I do want a quick announcement. There's also going to be the next one on accountability is on, if you could just go back a slide, on July 3rd. That's, again, a really important topic. So keep an eye out. The next one's coming up on 3rd July, and that's going to be on accountability. Next slide. Yeah, so we have an incredible set of speakers today who bring very diverse perspectives and experiences to this topic. So I'm really excited. The structure for today's discussions is going to be, we have Emanuel joining us from WSUP, who will kick us off with by sharing findings from Chapter 8 of the report that covers some really interesting case studies on data management and digitization, followed by a deep dive by Timothy, who's joining us from Nakuru, NAWASSCO, who will be sharing their journey on how they've sort of thought about gaps and invested systematically in strengthening their data systems. And Zach White, who's joining us from GSMA, who will then cover sort of really what they've seen or the findings from some of the research that they've commissioned on digital adoption patterns and what they've seen across contexts. So some really interesting presentations. And then we have an expert panel joining us where we'll really dive into a range of topics. And really, we're going to try and set aside as much time as possible today for sort of really an interactive discussion. Some quick housekeeping before we jump in, and I hand it over to you, Emanuel, to kick us off. Please use the Q&A tab for questions. I'm going to try and keep an eye out for that. Feel free to keep your questions coming in as speakers are presenting. You don't have to wait till the end, so I'm going to try and do my best to bring as many of your questions into the discussion that we have with this panel today. If you have general comments, you can always choose to put some of those comments in, but really use the Q&A chat for the questions. The webinar will be recorded and the slides will be shared with all the attendees. Yeah, with that sort of housekeeping, Emanuel, over to you to share the findings of the report.
Thank you very much, Deepa, for that quick introduction. Now, I will highlight part of this report that touched on the city and national level sanitation data management systems, which is core to the sanitation service delivery. Next slide. So we've highlighted, the report has highlighted the need for stronger data management systems at city, national, and also at global level as a first level priority for improving wastewater and fecal sludge management. And the key to this in terms of the need for sanitation data is because the report highlights the data enables the utilities or the cities and utilities in terms of resource allocation, both financial and the technical resources. So when the data is accurate, precise, then it creates an opportunity for financial and technical resource allocation in a very good way. And then looking at it, the data, when we have clear, measurable indicators, then it becomes an opportunity for public accountability and transparency in terms of sanitation service delivery. And there is a linkage. The data creates patterns and trends, which are very critical for linking the sanitation service with other services within the city, and this being the trends around climate resilience, environmental sustainability, and also related health outcomes. And the data become even more useful when it is disaggregated in terms of gender, and we are able to know how these all aspects of service affect the gender within the society, and also the locations, both urban, rural, and the income levels across the society. And that is that is very important, particularly the experience shared by some of the cities during this report development. But of course, you realize that over the years, particularly in the last 20 years, we've seen some improvement in terms of data over the status of sanitation services, but we still have some challenges in terms of how the data is being accessed, and this being that there is still some gap in terms of the investment in data systems compared to other areas like infrastructure. There is a lot of concentration or prioritization of construction as opposed to monitoring the work, which then creates some gaps in service quality data. And then the global models are also relying a lot on assumptions and proxy indicators, which are not very specific at times, leading to a number of imprecise information around, for example, the connection rates in some countries. You'll realize that the numbers remain stagnant or it has plateaued at a certain stage, not because the services are not increasing, but because the data is imprecise in certain aspects. And then some cities also lack the reliable and consistent data collection mechanisms. So you find the sector or the mandated institutions that are collecting and using the data are fragmented, and then that making the tracking of the data and even how it is enforced with the regulations becoming a challenge. Moving forward, next slide. So, but it is important for us to understand why the gaps are still there. Just as I mentioned, we've seen some improvement, particularly with the GMP, having created some visibility around the data. But we still have some, there is still a gap in terms of how detailed the data is and the real-time information flow, particularly in terms of actual coverage, the quality of the data, and around the sustainability of the sanitation services, particularly around the urban areas. A lot in the report, some countries, the rural side moved a bit in some countries, but in terms of the quality, the coverage in the urban areas, we still have some significant gaps. Now, the city governments and also even at the national, some of the national institutions still also have difficulty in terms of the design or the inclusive sanitation plans and how the effective making it how the programs are, particularly in terms to the data systems, but the monitoring of the SDG 6.3 has also improved, but we still have some opportunities to improve around the industrial sources and also the reliability of the treatment of the wastewater volumes. And then the last thing is that for us to get it right, then the budget tracking systems for the WASH is still undeveloped, and that means in terms of that aspect, we still need to have some effort being made around it. But of course, we saw some good examples around the national data systems. Kenya, for example, with WSUP having implemented a good annual impact report tracking of the sewerage coverage across many cities. In Tanzania, the ministry, the National Information System under the Ministry of Health has made good progress and linking health and WASH. And of course, Thailand also had a very good centralized government system of collecting and publishing the detailed data on wastewater treatment facilities. And of course, other countries also showed a lot of had already showed a lot of effort in terms of how the wastewater treatment is being monitored. Some key action areas for strengthening global and local data systems were also identified, and this included enhancing the municipal monitoring systems, ensuring that there is human resources, technology in place, and of course, strengthening of the institutional capacity to manage comprehensive sanitation data sets, and then the integration so that of the sanitation data across multiple utilities and ministries with the responsibilities of collecting and also using the data. And open access to data also has been highlighted as a key area for us to strengthen that data systems, to make it shareable and also a learning platform to be able to create benchmarks across countries. And then fostering collaboration, which I think has also been stressed upon in the report, so that we have an alignment of indicators. There is indicators and definitions of those indicators to create some holistic picture in terms of service delivery, and also the provision of sustained financial and technical support so that the data remains robust and consistent and supported, and the institutions are supported to be able to ensure there is alignment and the trends are not missed, such that each year across the period, data is available.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you. This is fantastic. Thank you for that quick snapshot and overview. There are some really great case studies in the report, sort of building on really what Emmanuel presented. I'd encourage all of you joining us here to go to the link and check it out for yourselves. In fact, in today's panel, we have the speaker, we have Timothy joining us from Nakuru, which is one of the featured case study, presenting really their journey. Timothy is the focal point for sanitation at Nakuru, and also the consumer, the person that's leading the low income, really the services for low income consumers. And so, Timothy, we're really excited to hear from you on what your journey has been. Over to you, Timothy.
Thank you, Deepa, for that. Good morning, good afternoon from wherever you're getting us from. My name is Timothy, as Deepa has introduced me, and I'll be looking at how we are advancing safe sanitation through data and digitization. What has been our experience in Nakuru City? And I think from the first slide, I would like to introduce whom we are. Nakuru Water and Sanitation Services Company is a private company owned by the county government of Nakuru. We are serving a population of around 575,000, and water coverage, we have around 94%. We are having rationed water supply and supplying around 20-21 hours of supply. In terms of water sources, we are fully dependent on groundwater, and we have a demand of around 75,000 cubic meters, but we are able to supply around 45,000. That's why 20 hours, around 20 hours of supply per day. We have an revenue of around 26%, and a customer base of around 49,000. On sanitation, we have a sewer coverage of 30%, and all others are dependent on on-site sanitation. That is around 70%. We have an accredited lab to test water and wastewater, and we formed a subsidiary company called NAWASSCO for briquette production. So on our journey, the next slide, on data collection, we've been collecting data, and specifically for sanitation, we are coming from manual, and then next we've done open source tools. For these tools, we used M-Water and Kobo Collect, whereby we came up with a schema for ensuring we are able to collect the type of data. For instance, you can look at the sanitation situation when you are doing the household survey, whereby we identify the type of data to collect. If you look at from 5.1 all the way to 5.3, those are the service value chains that we're using M-Water for that data collection. But however, we are moving out of the open source tools and now using more of proprietary platforms, that is the paid platforms, through an enterprise resource planning system. And through this system, for instance, I've just picked, we are using mobile application to collect data from when exhausters are dislodging at our treatment. Then after the data collection, the next slide, we visualize and process this data using ArcGIS, another paid or proprietary platform. If you look at that, that is, since we are very clear on the 31% sewer coverage, we always have a challenge of what are the types of sanitation systems our community have. And therefore, from that data collection exercise, we've been able to map out at least 138,000 households who are dependent on on-site sanitation facilities. And you can be able to look at their occupational settings. Is it domestic premise? Is it a mix whereby you're having a domestic premise with a commercial entity, for instance, businesses? Are they religious institutions? When you're looking at religious institutions, we are looking at the different religions. You know, we have, for sanitation, we have the wipers and washers, and therefore their types of sanitation systems will differ. In containment, since we are dependent on groundwater again, we've been able to profile whether our systems are lined or unlined, and therefore now we can be able to plan for safely managed sanitation at containment. For collection, from this mapping, we'll be able to identify appropriate emptying and transportation technologies. For instance, we are using the pupu pump and the primary collection points. These are transfer stations whereby, especially in the low-income areas, we are not able, the exhauster or the vacuum trucks cannot be able to maneuver, and therefore using long pipes, for instance, 80 meters, a pupu pump can be able to push sludge 80 meters to a transfer station, and that photo can show that. Then on KPIs monitoring, we're also using the GIS dashboard and the interactive dashboards to monitor the sanitation KPIs. Then the other advantage of using proprietary platforms as compared to mobile platforms, we can be able to customize our reports. And after now processing and visualizing the data, now we come to plan for sanitation. In the planning process, we used one of the tools like the EquiServe tool. And one of the things, the process for us to be able to do a citywide inclusive sanitation plan is to have a baseline. So the process that we're having mapping out the sanitation services, understanding what is the population that you're serving, categorizing this population in terms of income, in terms of their socioeconomic status, in terms of their vulnerability, in terms of their religion, so that you can tailor-make the solutions for them. Then we define the sanitation systems that they require. And then we define what sanitation systems for emptying transportation are they using. For instance, is it conveyance through sewer, or is it conveyance through manual pit emptying, or is it conveyance through vacuum truck operators? Once we identify that, the next step is to understand the sanitation service delivery models. What will be the cost of constructing, for instance, a household toilet? When you look at that cost, who will bear that? Is it the household? Will the household be able to meet that cost, or will you require subsidies to provide for that, so that you can plan for them? Then when you're looking at once we've done capture and containment, on conveyance, we look at who will provide that service. And when you look at who will provide that service, for instance, in Kenya, we have the regulator who is the Water Service Regulatory Board, regulating the utilities. Then after the utilities, we have a model of public sector delegation, whereby now we regulate the vacuum truck operators, which are privately owned, and the manual pit emptiers, which are groups that we are trying to capacity build on that. So once after that, then you can have the infrastructure planning. And the infrastructure planning now is to look at what cost will be involved. For instance, if you are looking at the hardware details, what length of sewer shall we require to have to enhance access to safely managed sanitation? If you are looking at capture and containment, what numbers do we look at? Numbers of containment that we require for conveyance, for on-site sanitation. What are the equipment that will be required? Then with all these hardware, what will be the cost of the service? What will be the tariffs involved? And for maintenance, what will be the capital expenditure, what will be operational and maintenance expenditure, what we are calling CapManex. Then the last one is financing now the service. When you now plan for this service, how shall we finance that service? So one of the things we've done in Nakuru and in Kenya, we've been able to develop a tariff, a sanitation development fee, that will be a charge for all customers within our service area, and then we generate this finance to support, especially on-site sanitation services. And another technology that we've also adopted is the simplified sewers, so that you can generate internal financing, but you can be able to enhance services. To couple that with transfers, looking at grants, currently we are more looking at conditional grants, whereby we have match funding, the utility contributes, and the development partners also chips in with their contribution. Then there is the public equity, whereby we invite the public to invest in sanitation. Then the other one is the commercial financing, then looking at the terms of finance, what will be the rates of the return, and what will be the interest of the grant period. And that is what we are doing in Nakuru for safely managed sanitation. Thank you.
Awesome. Timothy, I'm sure the audience, there are so many questions that's going to come up because this is so exciting. You've covered so much ground, from how you've built interactive dashboards to how you're using data systematically to drive sanitation planning. I can see some questions coming in already in the Q&A, and I encourage, like Emmanuel, I see one for you coming up already. So if you want to just take some of that in chat, I'll try and bring some of that into the conversation. But if you want to type and respond on the chat, feel free to do that as well. This is, I think, Sam, do we have an audience poll now, or do we go straight? Perfect. Sam, over to you for the audience poll, and then.
Yeah, thank you, Deepa. So we have a couple of audience polls built in here, really just to test if you're paying attention as we move through the session. And this also links to the quiz component of the online masterclass that ties into this content that we're presenting, the UN-Habitat Masterclass. So if we can launch the first poll question, please. Now, we're not going to give you very long. We're giving you 30 seconds to respond to this. Although data gaps persist relating to the coverage, quality, and sustainability of sanitation services, most countries can now report reliably on treated wastewater volumes. So is that true or false? And I'm asking you to look back to Emmanuel's presentation. The answer was in there. Most countries can now report reliably on treated wastewater volumes. I'm going to give you 5 more seconds to put in your responses, and then let's show the result, please. False. Okay, so well done to the majority of you. That is the correct answer. That question is false. So UN Habitat is the custodian of SDG 6.3.1, which is looking at levels of wastewater, industrial and domestic, that is safely treated. And in fact, only a handful of countries globally are able to provide reliable estimates in that area currently. Although in the report, we were able to generate city level estimates directly from the service authorities, which implies that data can be accessed, but there are structural issues around the national level data systems to then provide national estimates, and we go into that, of course, in the report. Okay, back to you, Deepa.
Thank you, Sam. No, that's so interesting, and I know there's a question in the Q&A about sort of are there good methodologies, and Emmanuel, if you want to weigh in on that, feel free in the Q&A, and we can come back and take that during the questions and sort of really the discussion. Now, the last presentation for this session, this sort of webinar, is Zach White's joining us from the GSMA. I'm going to make sure I get the full GSMA Mobile for Development Digital Utilities program. He's a senior insights manager, and Zach, you're going to be sharing sort of really some of the research you've commissioned, right, and work that and what you've seen from that in terms of findings on patterns around digital adoption around the world. Over to you, Zach.
Thanks very much, Deepa. And yeah, I've got 6 minutes, so this will be a crash course in thinking and framing digital adoption. I've got 6 slides. The first 4 of them are about how to think about digital adoption, or what digital solutions are in wastewater, and then a couple about the state of adoption globally and what you might want to be doing at different stages of that journey. So this publication, 2019, from the IWA's Digital Water Programme, I'd really recommend it as a read, as a fundamental from everyone. And they start with presenting, if I have a click, this sort of way of thinking about digital adoption, where you look at the kind of value chain or the processes within water or wastewater, and you begin to map on some of the different solutions and where they come in. I think this is nice and it gives a good overview, but where this falls down a lot of the time is that things get intensely complicated very quickly, and it doesn't always guide you towards which solutions might be most effective in which contexts. And moving on, that paper also presented this framework for the phases of digital adoption, which again, I think is foundational to thinking through what you might be doing at different stages of adoptions, what this looks like. And that IWA paper gives an overview or a general kind of rubric for thinking through what stage of digital adoption you might be at and what you might want to be considering at that stage. Moving on. So in the global report, we used a framework that was developed in part from some research that we did with WSUP on the experience of Kenyan water utilities. And there we took a much more technology-focused approach to framing digital adoption. And we found this particularly useful because it actually gives you a very clear language for talking about the components of a digital solution and what you might want to be thinking about across those. So if we could bring that up. And this really follows the stages that data would move through. So from the acquisition, the sensors you might use in wastewater, IoT for monitoring wastewater discharges, or as kind of waste moves through a treatment process, or as Timothy said in the case of Nakuru, looking at mobile apps for data collection on the case of fill levels for pit latrines, for example. There's then the kind of connectivity and network infrastructure, which is where we sit a lot, which is non-trivial because that will change quite a lot in terms of the context, and then the type of network you're using will also change the type of devices you can use. Then there's this whole kind of piece down at the bottom of what you do within the system, so the digital environment of the utility. There we're seeing a few trends, and I think this is something Emanuel and Timothy both picked up on, but the trend towards enterprise resource planning systems, creating that single digital environment that can begin to bring together the commercial and the technical operations. And as part of this, finally, we have the customer relationships piece, which sits slightly outside. And we frame that just because it's so important, but also because you will have specific tools, mobile applications, web, whatever, if you're using digital tools there. And the final slide on thinking this through is to combine it with the utilities of the futures framework, and look at, if I could have a couple of animations. Thank you. And look at where different digital tools bring together different parts of the utility operations. And it's something I'll talk about in terms of the adoption, but really there it's not necessarily separating the technical and the commercial operations, but looking at what those digital tools are that unite them. I think one big trend that we've seen in a lot of the utilities that we work with is, 5 or 10 years ago, you might be developing different digital systems for your human resources, your revenue and billing, or your kind of technical operations. Now, or at later stages of digital maturity, there's a real push to bring those together into a single digital environment, which is also really important. Again, going back to Emanuel's presentation, if we want to talk about interoperability or using any of that data for regulatory reporting or sharing across utilities. Next slide, please. Very quickly, what do we know about adoption? Not a lot. There have been two big surveys, and the first was in 2019, the Smart Water Survey. I won't go into that one, but you can have a look yourself. 70% of the respondents were from high-income countries. In 2022, we, together with the World Bank, the IWA, and the Global Water Practice, did a survey, 90% in low and middle-income countries. The vast majority identified at an early stages, and then you have an interesting split of about 50% digitalizing payments, 50% allocating budget, and 50% having some form of automation in their operations. This was a very quick survey, but I think it nonetheless just says a lot of the data just says it's 50-50 at this stage. And moving on, I'm running out of time, but just to say, as you're moving through, there's certain things that are more or less relevant at different stages. If you've not started developing a strategy, clearly defining needs, and looking at some of those very quick low-hanging fruits like payments or metering and billing, because they can have an immediate return on investment through getting revenue collection efficiency up. If you're beginning to integrate some of that digital technology, you might be looking at more advanced technologies as you begin to build some of that capacity within the organization. Customer engagement also is another slightly more advanced, but still low-hanging fruit. Moving on, there you need to be thinking more about the digital systems and the data systems that support more complex deployments. And once again, finally, there, if you've got that really strong foundation, I think there it looks at very advanced solutions, but also looking at that kind of financing piece for larger deployments. And the final stage, I'm not sure I've seen it, so I shan't comment. And that's it from me. I work with the GSMA's Digital Utilities Programme. The GSMA as a whole is the Global Industry Association for Mobile Operators. Within that, the foundation has spent 12 years working at the intersection of the mobile industry and the development sector. We're a grant-making foundation that supports digital innovation with social impact, and our work is supported by the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, and recently the Swedish International Development and Cooperation Agency. That's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Zach. So many things to pick up and talk more about, but I love the fact that we don't know a lot. And it feels like we're all sort of learning together, and we are a lot of the water utilities are in early stages of that journey, and we're learning together and really learning by doing in some sense. So I know we're going to kick off, but before I kick off, really the panel, Sam, over to you. Is there another audience poll? Yes.
One more poll, building on Zach's fascinating presentation, and also another teaser for the global report. So if we can bring up the question, please. So, which of these digital solutions do you think could have current or future relevance to sanitation and wastewater management? Now, some of these were referred to in Zach's presentation, others, I think, not directly. So this is also leading you to the global report where we expand on this answer. But digital payments and remote asset tracking, is that relevant to sanitation and wastewater? IoT and remote sensing data, big data, AI and machine learning, and augmented reality and virtual reality tools. Which of those do you think could be relevant to sanitation and wastewater? Which of them not? So you can tick any of them that you think are relevant. Give you 5 more seconds. Again, a quick response. You can tick as many as you want. And can we launch the results, please? Okay, so in fact, all of these digital solutions have potential future applicability to sanitation and wastewater management. And I'm not going to say more here about how, because we don't have the time, but we do set that out in the global report in the chapter that Zach authored. So that's just another teaser to drive you to that report. Okay, back to you, Deepa, for the panel.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks. It was interesting to see the results on that one. Great. So I think just picking up on this thread of learning by doing, and I know there are a bunch of questions coming in. There's been questions, Emanuel, of course, on useful wastewater? Like, how do you do estimates? And I know there's a response there, and there are some really clearly laid out methodologies in the report. So I'm going to really go to Timothy, your presentation, because I think sort of practice can inform a lot about how as a community we can learn and think about some of these questions. Is your journey is obviously, and particularly thinking about doing systematic evidence-based planning. I'm sure that brought up a lot of blind spots on data and data systems and what's missing when it comes to sanitation. Can you tell us a little bit about what some of those, what the big ones were, where you went, oh my God, I can't believe I don't have even that information. And how did you go about fixing those blind spots? Yeah. And Timothy, if you want to weigh in a little bit on Robin's question about how you're building up data systems to address some of this more systematically beyond one-off surveys, feel free to weigh in on that as well. Timothy, over to you.
Thank you, Deepa, for that question. Data is a challenge, especially for water utilities. One, water utilities, we've been skewed to thinking of sewerage only. And therefore, when it came to on-site sanitation data, it was a problem. One, even understanding these type of systems. Two, for instance, at capture and containment, I'll be looking at the type of data you require. You need to know, are these systems lined or not aligned? Then even getting to know where they are. That was a big challenge to understand that. Two, fragmented roles between the Department of Health and Department of Water. You'll find that a lot of data is being collected by the Department of Health, especially on the community-led total sanitation approach. With that approach, it was more of just a toilet, but every household has a toilet. So no standards. That data is with public health. So collecting that data fit what we needed was quite a challenge. But however, sector coordination, bringing on board the Department of Public Health and ourselves, then first to understand what is it that we need to collect. Capture and containment, that was the biggest challenge. If you look at conveyance, the private exhausters are the one who are providing the service. And the other, they feel they own that data, should not be given to the public. So again, getting that data from them became a challenge. But continuous engagement, stakeholder engagement and the coordination was the game changer, and to ensure that we are able to get the data that we required. However, the other thing is when a household transitions from one sanitation system to another. For instance, I had a pit latrine, I've constructed a septic tank. We are not able to track that. How are they transitioning up the sanitation lane? So those changes still were a challenge and still poses a challenge currently, and that's why we are looking at building more of a robust system. Mm-hmm. And then the last one, I think Emanuel had alluded to that, data on wastewater, the volumes that are being treated. In many cases, they are estimates. Because for billing, we normally use an estimate for the volume produced, but we don't have meters to measure the effluent. And therefore, we can only work with the estimates. And that also.
Yeah, this is super interesting, Timothy. And I want to, because really what you're, and I think what's becoming very clear is that we cannot, but this is great. Clearly, this takes a lot of effort, leadership, and consistent efforts, but we can't rely on that to sustain itself over long periods of time. We need to digitalize workflows so that that generates data and good operational and administrative data that can then drive decision-making and engagement in operational management. And I want to, in a week, maybe I'll come to you with this because there are some good examples of course, how we've done that with traditional models or software, but I know that there is a growing call for taking a slightly different approach, at least in India. This idea of taking a digital public infrastructure approach to digitalize workflows, like how citizens request for a desludging service, or how, for instance, billing and payments are set up. Maybe a week, if you could help explain to us in a week as you, and maybe introduce EGA Foundation a little bit as well within that framing and the work you do. what is a DPI? How is it different from how we do traditional software development or digitalization? And how do you think water utilities can benefit from modules that are already built up, all the work that's happening in the digital public infrastructure world when it comes to water and sanitation workflows?
Sure. Thank you very much, Deepa, for the opportunity, and thank you to UN-Habitat team as well. Like Deepa just alluded to, I am from an organization called E-Governments Foundation, and large part of our work has been in terms of looking at how do we capitalize on this new movement called digital public infrastructures, which governments are very keen on. And I'll come to that as to why that is kind of becoming an easy way for governments to actually look at large-scale digital solutions. So the whole idea of a digital public infrastructure is that governments are now looking at having look at it in terms of physical infrastructure. Governments provide physical infrastructure, say for example roads, and then roads are being used by say a lot of private sector or governments or anybody to be able to transport or movement of people or movement of goods. But the underlying infrastructure is being laid by a government, and it facilitates private sector and civic society participations. So similarly, in the case of a digital infrastructure, governments are now looking at if we were to able to provision some basic foundational infrastructure, and if this infrastructure can guarantee in some ways, quality of data, and that's something which has come out quite often in this conversation, that data is never robust, data is fragmented, and if it can solve for those foundational issues, then the whole idea is that when you start bringing in workflows and transactions, then your underlying data is more robust, and hence the work that you want to do a lot for it becomes far more reliable. There is better data quality, and there's better estimation, budgeting, whatever needs to be done. So this is the the idea of a DPI being that governments are now don't need to set up massive centralized systems, but try and decentralize it as much as possible, give control back to municipal bodies where they can manage and own their data in their small ways. And if they are given control, then they're most likely able to maintain their own data themselves. And as a result of which, systems which get built in are able to stitch together different pieces of the puzzle which need to be solved for sanitation. So for an example, in an Indian state in Odisha, for decentralized sanitation, for fecal sludge management, you do have different providers. There's a citizen who needs to be serviced. Then there is a private body which kind of does the desludging. There is government which kind of takes care of making sure that the service delivery is guaranteed in a certain point of time. Then there is a treatment plant in where these wastes need to be processed. So very different pieces of types of people, types of interactions, but all stitched together through a common platform. Nothing very complex, but just that the flow of information kind of makes sure the data is not fragmented. This is just one simple example in sanitation. We're doing this in health. A lot of African countries are kind of looking at how service delivery in health is also happening through DPI. So DPI is a very interesting space, and I think as time goes by, I think people are becoming more and more comfortable in terms of different use cases that can be built through digital public infrastructure.
Thanks, Avik. And I know that there is already a workflow that's being developed and is live to support the entire end-to-end, and it's a mobile-based workflow. So you don't need an app, you don't need internet. You can operate entirely using just basically making calls, but then that facilitates the end-to-end on how a citizen requests a service, how the service connections made to the private sector operator, and how you then monitor FSDP operations. And you've built all of the foundational architecture in terms of location authentication, payment gateways, all of that workflow exists. And you also built out the modules that connect all of these different stakeholders and that speak to sanitation. So I do want, for those of you, and maybe Avik, you can drop a link to the work that eGov is doing and the modules you've already built. And for those of you interested in learning more about how you can easily plug and play or build on that or use that module, I think Avik is a good person to talk to. I want to sort of now, this is sort of speaking from how do you digitalize? What is the technicalities of how you digitalize? I want to step back a little bit now, Punita, and really come to you. And I'm really excited because, Punita, you've such a diverse background and experience. You've been a utility. You've thought about what it means to be a public utility and operate with that hat. You've served as a regulator and now as an independent private sector service provider. You're also bringing in a lot of that sort of experience and perspective. So you've sort of straddled all of those worlds. And I I'd love to hear what is the space of a regulator in the context of how a utility thinks and operates, Punita, in terms of creating demand for data, investing in data and digitalization or data management and digitalization systems. Uh, what has worked? Are there good examples of what regulators are already doing well there? Uh, and what can regulators be doing to generate demand with water utilities?
Okay, so I think I will not say what they have done or success story as of yet, because I feel like when it comes to this particular sector, this is one sector that lags behind. Right. We have seen a lot of other utilities, for example, when it comes to energy or telecommunications, how advanced they are. So in that sense, I feel like there's a lot more work to be done. But what I genuinely feel when it comes to regulator is regulator plays a catalytic role in cultivating a climate where investment in the data systems shouldn't be only considered as desirable, but it must be essential. Because right now, the way the regulators actually play the role is not really like they make it as if it's something fancy to have. It's not fancy anymore. It is necessity. So in order for that to happen, my point is regulators must lead by example. How they can lead by example is when they make their decisions, whether it's a policy decision, tariff setting, whatever not, right? They have to actually use data-driven decision-making process. Only then they can show by example or lead by example to show to the utility that this is the way decisions will be made. That will encourage utility to actually invest in the data systems. That also means regulators must demonstrate transparency and integrity in their own data practices. Where is their data sources, how they use that particular data to analyze, how they analyze it, and how they come up with the decisions. So there must be a transparency component, first and foremost to the utility, then to public, right? So only then there will be a confidence level and on both sides, and there will be readiness in the utility sector to invest because it is something that makes sense, that brings value to them. So this is one part of it. Another part of it is I do recall there was some conversation where sometimes regulators actually mandate it through regulation. Even though my background was previously from regulator and before that I was with utility, I don't think that is you see, when it comes to utility regulators, this is not a police and thief situation, right? So regulators here play a facilitator role. So because of that, the best approach is actually don't mandate via compliance, but facilitate. Design frameworks that reduce ambiguity when utilities actually embark on or investing in the data system. Try to eliminate redundancy, where regulator can come in and reduce redundancy, and then that means reducing costs in the investment of the data system and using that opportunity to reduce ambiguity, how things are being done, also rewarding them to actually embark on this particular process. So use this particular opportunity to facilitate. So this is where I feel like regulators can actually play a role. Because I always, I do know that in many countries, in many places, regulators tend to be like waiting for them to do something wrong and then try to catch. So I think that will create an ecosystem where the utility want to provide the data and will be very easy in providing that data. That again, is like a slippery slope when it comes to data governance and transparency. So they have to create that ecosystem.
That's a fantastic, and sort of just that means there's a whole new style and culture of regulation when it comes to how you create an environment that builds the incentives and creates a culture where we're all incentivized to share better data. And And that happens when you're starting to use it, right, Punita? When utilities see value in how their own lives and their own utilities can benefit from it rather than sort of the naming, shaming, and penalizing command control model. This is such a great point. And I want to, and I don't, and Zach, I'd love to hear from you. How does this resonate with your research? How much of a lever is regulation, for instance, as an impetus for driving digitalization behaviors? Or what are some of the levers that you see or ingredients that are a good trigger where you see that's kind of when utilities digitalize? What are the patterns you've observed from your research?
I think the first thing to say is it's incredibly mixed. So, as we've gone through a process, any particular time I'm, working in a new context, a new market, a new country, or even within the same country, I wouldn't like to hazard a guess at where a utility is because it can be enormously different. And I think it is quite a stochastic process, there's a bit of randomness in it. I think in cases like Kenya, you do have very, WSREB provides some leadership and there is that kind of foundation of good regulation, but it doesn't necessarily push forward the digital adoption there. And that's quite different from other cases such as Indonesia, for example, who mandate, got timed out on my light, who mandate the use of IoT to monitor wastewater. So that's a very heavy central. And I think India in particular stands out as well. So the smart cities mission has been fundamental in a lot of the digital adoption that's happened there, mainly because it provides that really clear implementation structure. So you had city level special purpose vehicles for investment. You had very clear guidelines on what to do with data. So I think the regulatory driver really varies across contexts, and I'm not sure a straight line can be drawn between any one action from a utility and that as a lever. I think it can be. I think what's often more important is the process that goes on within an organization. So digitalization has most of the time really unknown return on investment, and it depends what you do with those digital tools, how you bring your staff with you. If you're digitalizing meter reading, what are those meter readers doing? Are they resisting it, or are they coming with the process? So I think the idea of kind of sprinkling digital on top and hoping it works without missing the kind of people part, and that's of course why everyone talks about leadership so much. But yeah, really, I think regulation comes in. It can be a very strong driver. It can be important. You can have good regulation without digital. You can have regulation that supports digital. I think it depends on the mix.
That's super interesting. That sort of is a really
very useful answer. But
yeah, no, thanks, Zach. This is super. Yeah, apologies also because this is so interesting, and and maybe it's a good segue to this question of like if there's, and just for the audience to have like some really hey, here are some things that I'm going to remember and take away. If there's one thing that you think water utility should start doing and stop doing, right? Like, or say, stop doing this and start doing this. What's top of mind? What would you say? And I just took through because it's such a good segue from everything you just shared.
Yeah, well, I think it would be learning by doing and kind of starting at the right level. So I think that's why in the presentation, the progression view, a lot of the utilities we've spoken to try and go too fast, too quickly, waste money, don't realize benefits, get their fingers badly burnt. So I think there is a big process of learning by doing, which is digital solutions have, an enormous amount they can do, but there are also, follies littered across the sector. So I think it's just, building and taking that long-term view, and also really focusing on the solutions that feed back into improved service outcomes and keeping that focus in front of mind.
Stop trying to run and just maybe stop adopting the most glamorous, fancy, shiny thing. You don't always need an ERP from get-go, but perhaps start thinking about what you need first and build incrementally.
Yeah, and I think there's also a much stronger ecosystem supporting it. So some of the grantees we've supported in the past, Wonder Kid in East Africa and Diallo in Nepal, they're offering tailored ERP solutions really for all sizes and all budgets on a SaaS basis. So I think the market is also strengthening in terms of who's out there to really provide the appropriate solutions for different scales.
Great. Punita, I'd love with one thing that you think water utilities should stop and one thing that you'd like to see them start doing. Punita, what would you say?
One thing they should stop.
Yeah, like stop doing this now. We know it doesn't work, so stop.
No, I wouldn't know. I wouldn't necessarily say that they are doing, like, based on presentations, the earlier two presentations, right? I think they are on the right track. But sometimes when the data start getting collected, people do not, it goes on a momentum of like just gathering data without understanding why you are even gathering data in the first place. So probably there's to put a break and see what is the intended outcome that you want to achieve from all this data. What does it even mean? Because a lot of the conversation is in relation to how the utility runs their operations, but like the same data can be analyzed such a way and geared towards planning component of it. How do you even do future planning? How do you climate resilience planning? So that is where I feel like that shift, not to say shift, don't shift, do whatever you're doing, fantastic work, but that particular data set that you have can be used to analyze these aspects that I feel like lacking, and I'm worried that we might end up catching up to it pretty late.
That's such a great point and so powerful. Thank you, Punita. A week, and then Timothy, I'd love to hear, what a week would you say?
Okay. Yeah, I think you said a very important point in terms of having fit for purpose solutions, and I think not having something flashy to start with, I think, is important. I would also say one more thing that from our experience that we have seen, given that users are going to be common citizens and people who are kind of working on the ground, designing with having them in mind and making sure that there is accountability and ownership from their side right from the start helps in driving more and more adoption. So it's good to start. So instead of having a top-down approach, maybe a bottoms-up approach in terms of designing is something which we have seen works better. In terms of start doing, again, from our experience, sustainability of a solution, I think, comes in much later. And if that thought process in terms of how will this solution sustain over a longer period of time, and if those conversations are kind of baked up front, I just feel that then there is a way to understand how to manage costs over a period of time, and then making sure that this runs for a longer period of time.
Yeah.
Those would be my points. Thank you.
Of course, this is gold. And I'm Sam, I'm excited to see how all of this will come together in a follow-up note or brief. Timothy, what do you think?
My thinking is that utilities must stop collecting sanitation data for compliance and reporting. Because in many cases, utilities are only collecting that data for the regulator.
I love that.
And not for service delivery. If you look at the water side, since it has a revenue aspect, every month they are collecting data on meter readings. But visiting that household, data on the toilet is not being collected. And therefore now it will become a norm when we stop collecting data just for compliance, but for service enhancement. And that one will make utilities understand where are we in terms of access to safe sanitation. And then they'll be able to develop interventions for accelerating safe sanitation. One thing they must do, utilities, again, they have assets. Computer as an asset, but the data in that computer is not an asset. And therefore, we need to start classifying data as an asset. Once data is classified as an asset, the 8 principles of data management comes into play. Storage. We ensure that this data is stored in the correct format, analyzed in the correctly, and then it becomes a tool for evidence-based interventions. I think that would be my
love this. Oh, what a great way to end this webinar. I'll take 30 seconds, and Sam, over to you for closing. A couple of quick things that I want to just re-emphasize and round up today's discussion with, and I know we'll continue thinking and talking about this in different communities and groups. we really need data cannot be an afterthought. It needs to be an integral part of capital investment planning. Capital investment planning is not just pipes and pumps, it's data systems. It's systems that'll help you deliver a service. They have to be an integral part of capital investment planning. And creating healthy digitalization journeys and data systems is about cultures and mindsets much more. And so the people aspect of it's super important. And I want to say, the popular fish rots from the head, right? And so that means a lot of leadership role modeling, and you need to demonstrate that. And then that sort of creates the cultures and mindsets and incentives. And Puneet, this goes back to your point. It means having some of these conversations differently between regulators and utilities, and even within utilities. Maybe it's a big call to regulators. And going back to what you said, Timothy, stop forcing utilities to report on outcomes when they haven't built up the processes and systems to generate those outcomes. Maybe the call is for regulators to, rather than command and control, holding utilities accountable to generate safely managed sanitation metrics, which they simply cannot if they don't have the systems and the processes to do that. Maybe you create space and monitor governance and shifts in data systems and how that's maturing. So change the way you're thinking about KPIs on regulation and create space for dialogue and investment in systems, because good outcomes require good governance, and you will never have good governance without good data. Sam, with that, I know we're a minute over time, but over to you. This is super grateful for the panelists. And
No,
what a fantastic conversation. I really enjoyed being here with you all. Thank you. Sam, over to you.
no, that's perfect. Thank you, Deepa. As always, a brilliant synthesis, and what a fascinating discussion. I really learned a lot myself. I hope you did too. All our participants who've stayed with us. So all that's left for me is to first of all link us to the UN-Habitat Global Report. So much of the content that you have heard about today is in this report. You have the QR code there, and also to the online masterclass. So we have online modules where you can watch videos again around this content. And again, you have the QR code on your screen there. We'll also share these in the email with participants to follow, as well as the slides and the recording. And then if we can go on to the next slide, which is just to link in then to 2 more sessions in this 6-part masterclass, which will happen in July. You can see on your screen here, the next session is accountability, which is essentially around regulation. And we've heard, of course, in this session around that connection between regulation and data, and I'm sure we'll be building on that in that discussion. And finally, I just want to say a huge thank you to Deepa, in particular for moderating so expertly, giving your time and your expertise to this session is hugely appreciated, and to all of our expert speakers, again, brilliant discussion. So thank you for your time. We'll close it there and follow up by email.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for having me, Sam. Thanks.
Thank you.